Hello and welcome, everyone. The first thing that I need to do, the organizers of the Brooklyn Book Festival have asked me to convey their gratitude to their many corporate and government sponsors for helping make this event possible. That list includes the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, NYC and Company, the Department of Cultural Affairs, Target, Astoria Federal Bank, Boar's Head Provisions, Citibank, the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, the Brooklyn Community Foundation, the Marriott Hotel, and Time Out New York. Today's panel is titled Moving On Up, the Myth and Reality of Upward Mobility. And it's a great honor to be here and to be moderating with such a distinguished panel. Let me introduce them to you briefly. Professor Gloria J. Browne-Marshall is the author, most recently, of Race, Law, and American Society, 1607 to present. She is a civil rights attorney who has litigated cases for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she's an associate professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. She's also the author/editor of this new booklet, The U.S. Constitution, An African American Context. Catherine Newman, to her right, is a professor of sociology at Princeton University and the author or co-author of 7 books, including, most recently, The Missing Class, Portraits of the Near Poor in America. And at the end of the row, Lewis Lapham is the founder and editor of Laphams Quarterly. Before that, he was the editor for many years of Harper's Magazine and the host of World in Time on Bloomberg Radio. He is the author of 13 books, trumping all the rest of us, including his most recent, Pretensions to Empire. And in the interest of full disclosure, I should say that I worked under Lewis for almost a decade at Harper's, and he really gave me my start in journalism. So if you see me lobbing softballs at him, that's why. My name is Paul Tuff. I'm an editor now at the New York Times Magazine, and the reason that I think I'm moderating this particular panel is that I'm the author as well of a book called Whatever It Takes, Geoffrey Canada's Quest to Change Harlem and America, which was just published in paperback. And it is, in its own way, a story of upward mobility. I spent 5 years reporting this book, watching as Geoffrey Canada built and expanded the Harlem Children's Zone. It's a community organization in Harlem that combines schools and social services for children in a 97-block zone. And the idea is to give every child in that neighborhood, which is a high-poverty neighborhood, a real chance to succeed. And that means, as Geoffrey Canada sees it, providing them with both a good education and robust social and medical services, starting at birth and going all the way through college. And only with that kind of support, Jeff believes, can he truly level the playing field for the children of Harlem and give them a real shot at upward mobility, a chance to transcend the generational poverty that many of them find themselves in. So that's one view of upward mobility, that it's possible, but it takes an enormous amount of work and help to happen. It's a complicated question, this notion of upward mobility in America. It's one of our founding myths, and I use the word myth not in the sense that it's not true, although we can certainly debate that, but in the sense that this idea really goes to the core of our self-conception as a nation, what we represent to ourselves and to the world. We have about 40 minutes until they eject us. I want to take some time at the end to invite you all to ask questions to any members of the panel. So keeping an eye on the clock, panelists, I'm going to ask each of you an opening question, ask you to keep your responses to 5 minutes or less, and then go for a little bit more of a free-for-all, asking you more questions and having you respond to one another a bit more, and then we'll go to Q&A. So I want to start our conversation by asking Lewis Lapham to give us something of a historical perspective on economic mobility in the United States. For those of you who aren't familiar with Lapham's Quarterly, it's a quarterly journal of history. And what makes it unique is the way that Lewis uses history to animate the present. Each issue focuses on a single topic, work or love or family or money, and it presents both historical documents and original essays that address that topic. So I thought I would ask Lewis to give us that kind of perspective on upward mobility. Is this a particularly American idea? Where does it come from? What stories in our history have we told ourselves about upward mobility, and how true are those stories?
Well, we love to tell ourselves that story. I mean, it's our founding story. The Puritans come to build a city on a hill. The early arrivals in New England are merchant adventurers setting up stock companies, looking for Spanish gold, for new fortune, to build in the wilderness a new Jerusalem. I mean, both spiritually and economically. Most of our heroes throughout our history are the self-made men, who start with nothing. Benjamin Franklin is the son of an impoverished candle maker, rises by his wits, talent, and so forth to become one of the leading citizens of his age. Alexander Hamilton is a bastard born in the West Indies and makes his way in colonial America. Tom Paine talks about the birthday of a new world. And it continues throughout our history. I mean, we have Abraham Lincoln. We have currently within our last 5 of our last presidents, Johnson, Carter, Obama, Reagan, Clinton, are men who start in dismal obscurity and rise through the ranks to become president of the United States. Again, it's the same story of our the railroad kings of the 19th century. Carnegie starts out as a poor man. So does John D. Rockefeller. The idea that you can make something of yourself, invent yourself, is one of the fundamental American ideas. You go west, you find a new personality, you invent a new equation, you build a better mousetrap, and rise not only to economic security, but also to stature within the society. Rise in class, rise in authority. Tocqueville talks a lot about the movement of the rising and falling in America when he's writing about in the democracy in America in the 1840s. People are either on their way up or on their way down, and it's that we're about movement. The whole society, and always has been. I mean, whether you're moving up or down on the social scale, or whether you're moving into a new region, across the next line of mountains to start a new life, tell a new story, and it's our favorite story, and it's the very essence of the New York Post.
Excellent. Gloria, I want to turn to you next, if I may. Your most recent book addresses the history and persistence of racial discrimination in this country. And race is certainly a complicating factor in the question of upward mobility, to put it mildly, because African Americans statistically are much more likely to experience downward mobility than whites, and much less likely to experience upward mobility. There's a project run by the Pew Charitable Trusts called the Economic Mobility Project that does some really interesting research about how economic mobility works in terms of income in the country. And they have one set of findings where they divide everybody into 2 groups, the top 60% and the bottom 40%, roughly speaking, haves and have-nots. And among children born into that haves group, 43% of white kids move downward from one generation to the next, but 78% of black kids move downward. And among the have-nots, 59% of white children moved up to become haves, and just 25% of black kids did the same. So those are statistics. I want you to give me more context about that. How much is economic mobility in this country a racial issue, and how much is it about something else entirely?
Well, let's go back to what Lewis was saying as far as history is concerned. If we go back to the Jamestown colony, and that's why my book, Race, Law, and American Society, begins in 1607, because the Jamestown colony is a moment of upward mobility for the world, for most of the world, and downward mobility for other parts of the world.